In a crushingly swift campaign, Germany humiliated France in just 6 weeks during World War II, exposing the utter inadequacy of French military efforts. The famed Maginot Line, touted as an unbreakable defense, was sidestepped with ease as German panzers roared through the Ardennes, an area the French mistakenly thought was unpassable. France's old-school tactics and complacent brass crumbled under the relentless blitzkrieg. The German juggernaut's rapid push left French forces in shambles, their retreat a chaotic mess of failure. Paris fell like a house of cards. The once proud French army reduced to a symbol of ineptitude and defeat as the nation caved in a humiliating armistice in June 1940, splitting France into German territory in the north and a puppet state in the south that would come to be known as Vichy France. After that slap in the face, when the United States finally joined the war, they planned their first significant move, Operation Torch, landing in North Africa to wrest control of the Mediterranean from the Axis powers. The Americans assumed Vichy French colonies would welcome them as liberators and rally to fight against their German oppressors. As General George Patton and 35,000 men of the US 2nd Division stood off the shore of Casablanca, expecting a peaceful reception, the French Navy, under Vice Admiral Félix Michelier, took battle positions with 11 submarines, 7 destroyers, an incomplete battleship, and numerous shore batteries. It was madness. The US forces had over 100 ships at their disposal. If the French wanted to be humiliated again, Patton was ready to oblige. It happened so fast that it was hard to believe. In June 1940, France crumbled under the ferocious German blitzkrieg. The swift campaign forced the British to evacuate, leaving the French military in shambles. Germany occupied northern France, while a collaborationist regime took root in Vichy, controlling the south and its crucial colonies, including the vital port of Casablanca. Officially neutral, Vichy France leaned heavily toward Germany, vowing to defend its territory against Allied incursions. After the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941, the United States plunged into the war. The Allies quickly devised a strategy to leverage US forces to help liberate Europe. When the US joined the war, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill breathed a sigh of relief, knowing Britain would finally get the military support it desperately needed. But the road ahead wasn't smooth. American and British commanders often had conflicting priorities. General George C. Marshall, the US Army's Chief of Staff, was keen to liberate Europe and take the fight directly to the Germans. His British counterpart, Field Marshal Alan Brooke, the Imperial General Staff Chief, had different ideas. The Blitz had battered the British, and Brooke knew the eager American troops were still green and disorganized. He viewed a massive amphibious landing in France as a disaster waiting to happen. The UK, he believed, would bear the brunt of the operation, and they weren't ready. Years later, Brooke would describe his frustration with Marshall, quote, "I found Marshall's rigid form of strategy very difficult to cope with. He never fully appreciated what operations in France would mean, the different standard of training of German divisions as opposed to the raw American divisions and most of our new divisions. He could not appreciate that the Germans could reinforce the point of attack 3 to 4 times faster than we could, nor would he understand that until the Mediterranean was open again, we would always suffer from a crippling shortage of sea transport." Thus, the Allied strategy reached an impasse. The Americans pushed to liberate France, while the British wanted them to secure the Mediterranean first. The situation frustrated Marshall so much that he briefly considered shifting the US Army's focus from Europe to the Pacific, potentially leaving Britain alone on the Western Front. In the end, it was President Franklin D. Roosevelt who broke the deadlock. Overruling his military high command, something Churchill never did, Roosevelt was determined to present a united front against the Germans. He understood the American public's desire to confront the Nazi regime and wanted US troops to engage the Germans as soon as possible. The recent humiliating British defeat at Tobruk also influenced Roosevelt's decision. Churchill was at the White House when he received news of the loss in Libya. Witnessing Churchill's shock, Roosevelt pledged to send American troops to North Africa. Against his general's advice, Roosevelt ordered the army to follow the British plan and strike North Africa to free the Mediterranean. The overall plan for the invasion was dubbed Operation Torch, scheduled for November 1942. The operation called for multiple landings in Algeria and Morocco, all parts of French North Africa. The port of Casablanca was especially crucial, as its port and major airport would serve as a critical supply conduit for Allied forces in Africa. If Spain were to join the Axis and cut off the Straits of Gibraltar, capturing Casablanca would be even more critical to maintaining the supply line for the invasions in Algeria. The Allies also had to consider the stance of the Vichy French forces. The Allies hoped the Vichy forces in the French colonies might defect to their side. However, tensions were high following the British attack on the Vichy fleet at Mers-el-Kébir in July 1940. The British Royal Navy launched Operation Catapult, an aggressive strike against the Vichy French fleet anchored at Mers-el-Kébir near Oran, Algeria. This preemptive move aimed to prevent the powerful French fleet from falling into German hands, following France's armistice with Nazi Germany. The dramatic and contentious attack resulted in substantial destruction and loss of life. A dark and turbulent episode in naval warfare. At 5:54 p.m., Vice Admiral James Somerville issued an ultimatum to French Admiral Marcel Gensoul, demanding the French fleet either join the Allies, sail to a British port, or be scuttled. Gensoul, interpreting the ultimatum as an affront to French honor, refused. With negotiations stalled, Somerville ordered his ships to open fire. HMS Hood, one of the largest and most potent British battlecruisers, initiated the attack. The first salvo targeted the French battleship Bretagne, which exploded in a massive fireball after a direct hit, sinking within minutes. This explosion resulted in the tragic loss of over 1,000 French sailors. Another storied French battleship, the Richelieu, was struck and damaged, rendering her temporarily unfit for combat. Amidst the chaos, French sailors scrambled to man anti-aircraft guns, firing desperately at the British attackers. The French destroyer Mogador was hit, her aft magazine exploding and setting the ship ablaze. Despite the French crew's efforts, the British fleet's overwhelming firepower inflicted severe damage. It was a harrowing scene. Towering plumes of smoke rose across the coast, and the roar of gunfire and the cries of wounded sailors filled the air. British aircraft from the carrier HMS Ark Royal joined the fray, strafing the harbour and adding to the devastation. By the end of the assault, over 1,297 French sailors were lost, and much of the fleet lay in ruins. The British suffered minimal casualties. The attack on Mers-el-Kébir was a stark demonstration of the brutality of war and the British cold yet unwavering commitment to winning the war. This attack sowed deep resentment between France and Britain, with many French contending the British acted rashly and mishandled negotiations with French naval officers. Consequently, it was decided that the invasion force for Casablanca would be all-American, assuming the Vichy French might be more inclined to cooperate with Americans than with the British. As they prepared for the invasion, the Allies engaged with sympathetic Vichy officers, hoping for minimal resistance. Major General Mark Clark met with several of these officers in October, securing crucial support. The invasion force for French Morocco was split into 3 groups, with landings planned to the north and south of Casablanca, and a central group to occupy the city. This force included some 35,000 men from the US 2nd Armored Division and the US 3rd and 9th Infantry Divisions, all under the command of Major General George Patton. The Vichy defenders in Casablanca comprised 4 infantry regiments under General Antoine Betouard. More importantly, Casablanca housed a significant French naval base with sizable forces, including 11 submarines, 7 destroyers, and the incomplete battleship Jeanne Bart. Additionally, Casablanca Harbour was defended by the imposing El Hank Coastal Artillery Battery, which comprised 4 7.6-inch guns and 4 5.4-inch guns, posing substantial complications for the Allied landing force. Opposing them was a fleet of more than 100 vessels under the command of Rear Admiral Henry Hewitt, including the battleship USS Massachusetts, the fleet carrier USS Ranger, the escort carrier USS Sewanee, and the heavy cruisers Wichita and Tuscaloosa, as well as the cruisers Augusta and Brooklyn and several destroyers. This force had the objective to provide covering fire for almost 350 landing craft that would carry US infantrymen to the beaches of Casablanca. However, the entirety of Task Force 34 consisted of over 100 ships for the entire invasion of French Morocco and was split into 3 groups. As the invasion fleet approached on November 7th, plans with the French started to collapse. General Charles Nogues, in overall command of French forces in Morocco, initially seemed sympathetic to the Allies. Known for switching allegiances frequently, Nogues was dubbed General No Yes. He had reluctantly accepted the 1940 armistice and, as commander of Vichy forces in North Africa, followed German commands, hunted down free French partisans, and enforced German anti-Semitic laws. On the night of November 7th, General Antoine Béthoir attempted a coup d'état against the French military command, so that he could surrender to the Allies the next day and save lives. During the maneuver, Béthoir's men surrounded the villa of High Commissioner General Nogues, but the cornered general was able to call for help before coup forces could breach the building. Then, after Béthoir's insurrection was taken care of, Nogues immediately reinforced the beaches to resist the Allied landings. Even more dire was the fact that no discussions had been held with French Vice Admiral Félix Michelier, who had recently been assigned as the admiral in charge of French naval forces in Morocco. Michelier, part of the Armistice Commission with Germany, had not yet earned the confidence of the pro-Allied Vichy officers. As Hewitt's forces arrived, the two most critical officers in French Morocco were not aligned with the Allies, setting the stage for a fierce confrontation. In hopes that the Vichy defenders would not resist, the invasion force decided against a pre-invasion bombardment. This decision proved risky as French shore batteries opened fire on the landing groups shortly after midnight on November 8th, marking the beginning of a tough battle for Casablanca. Many US troops were baffled that the French, recently humiliated by the Nazis, would fight for them instead of joining the Allies. To Americans, it made no sense for the French to defend their oppressors. However, the personal egos of some French officers, compounded by resentment after the attack on Mers-el-Kébir, paved the way for a senseless battle. The French were outnumbered, outgunned, and outclassed. Yet it was the wild Atlantic surf that posed a massive headache for the arriving Allied forces. At Fedala, the transport ship Leonard Wood lost 21 of its landing crafts to the surf, resulting in several casualties. The Thomas Jefferson ship lost 16 of its 31 craft during the first landing attempt, while the Carroll ship lost 18 of her 25 landing craft. Many others were damaged, leaving just 2 boats to deliver troops and supplies to the beach. Due to the sea consuming their boats, many brave American soldiers who were eager to prove themselves in battle never reached the shore. When the tide settled, some troopships managed to anchor at Fedala near Casablanca. However, they were soon spotted by French defenses from Pont Blondin. As the amphibious vehicles approached, the French turned their searchlights on the beach but were quickly taken out by American machine gun fire. Scattered fire between both sides led to significant confusion on the beach. Consequently, 20 of the 23 amphibious vessels that were supposed to land were damaged after hitting rocks. Only 3,500 infantrymen managed to land safely, but they were underpowered and lacked adequate supplies. At precisely 7 a.m. on November 8th, Admiral Hewitt dispatched 4 destroyers to conduct shore bombardment. The French shore defenses reacted immediately, damaging the destroyers USS Murphy and USS Ludlow in a brief but brutal exchange of fire. Only with the support of the heavy cruisers USS Augusta and Brooklyn could the Navy silence the guns of Pont Blondin and Fedala. The French garrison then sent fighter planes to attack the American vessels, but the warplanes were driven off by the concentrated anti-aircraft fire from the warships. As shore bombardments continued and American vessels protected the troopships while attempting to land more men, General Michelier dispatched 5 submarines to conduct defensive patrols and sink any US vessel that dared approach the harbor. Soon, more French aircraft were dispatched to counter the American fighters launched from USS Ranger and Suwannee. Furious dogfights erupted over Casablanca harbor, with smoke and anti-aircraft fire obscuring the area as the first bombs fell at 8 a.m. Within hours, about 10 civilian liners and freighters were sunk, and US bombs caught 3 French submarines before they could leave their moorings. The situation worsened for the French garrison, as the heavy cruisers Wichita and Tuscaloosa joined the fray with support from the battleship USS Massachusetts. Although not fully operational, the French battleship Jean Bart opened fire as soon as Massachusetts came into range, firing 7 rounds before the devastating 16-inch guns of her American counterpart silenced her, jamming her rotating mechanism. The combined might of the US Navy concentrated their fire on the El Hank battery. By 9 a.m., the French 2nd Light Squadron abandoned the harbor under a thick smoke screen to target the US troopships anchored at Fedala. However, they were soon attacked by American aircraft and intercepted by more hostile ships, sparking a sea battle. From 11 a.m. to noon, more ships and submarines joined the fray. The French vessels were soon outgunned and outnumbered. The destroyer Milan had to be beached during the retreat, while Fougueux and Boulonnais faced off against USS Massachusetts and Tuscaloosa. Fougueux sank quickly. The French light cruiser Primouguet and destroyers Albatros, Frondeur and Brestois joined the fight to assist their comrades. Still, more US Navy ships attacked from various positions. USS Brooklyn and Augusta arrived to intensify the pressure on the overwhelmed French sailors, unleashing salvo after salvo in all directions. The French destroyer Albatros had to be beached, while Primouguet managed to return to Casablanca but was deemed unfit for combat. Meanwhile, the other two destroyers capsized with heavy losses. Ultimately, the French managed to destroy more than half of the 350 American landing craft and prevented the US Army from landing more than 4,000 soldiers and crucial supplies. However, the fierce resistance came at a steep cost, showcasing the chaotic and brutal nature of the battle for Casablanca. By November 9th, furious winds and violent 6-foot waves made it difficult for the Americans to land more infantry and unload supplies. Those who had secured a beachhead endured a rough night with little ammunition and scarce resources. Food, water, and medical supplies for the wounded were minimal. Worse still, the soldiers pushing towards Casablanca had limited communication, as most of their radio equipment was lost aboard the destroyed troopships. Still, the able-bodied men pressed on, moving under the cover of night to avoid detection by French forces. On the morning of November 10th, 2 French minesweepers opened fire on the advancing US soldiers. The USS Augusta and 2 destroyers engaged, but retreated when the newly repaired turret of Jean Bart targeted them. Hours later, American SBD Dauntless dive bombers finally silenced the powerful ship. French submarines launched several torpedo salvos against the American task force with lackluster results, failing to score any hits. Realizing he had no ships or men to mount a successful defense, Michelier surrendered Casablanca on November 11th. The French garrison, overwhelmed and outmanned, fought bravely. Over 75% of US supplies remained on the ships, and only about 5,000 of the expected 20,000 men managed to land on Casablanca's shores. Although small in scale, the naval battle of Casablanca had significant results. The resistance by Vichy forces only delayed the port's capture by a few days, and American losses were considered slight. The capture of Casablanca provided a crucial port in West Africa and an airbase that served as a staging area for US airplanes in the European theater throughout the war. However, the losses felt unnecessary, a tragic clash between potential allies. The loss of some 460 French sailors and over 24 French ships echoed the bitter memory of Mers-el-Kébir. After the port's capture, Antoine Bétoir rallied the French Vichy forces in Morocco to the Allied side. Admiral Michelier was pushed into retirement, and Charles Nogues faced an uncertain future, trusted by neither the Axis nor the Allies. In 1947, he was convicted of treason by the French and sentenced to 20 years of hard labor, but he escaped to Portugal, never serving his sentence. Perhaps the most intriguing character of the battle was the battleship Jean Bart. Laid down in 1936, the ship was unfinished when France surrendered in 1940 and was rushed to Casablanca to escape the approaching Germans. The ship was raised after being damaged during the battle, but the Allies could not decide its fate. The French hoped to send Jean Bart to the United States for completion, but the US was focused on its own ships. Jean Bart spent the rest of the war in Casablanca as a training ship. Finally, in 1945, the French decided to complete her, and she entered active service in 1955, becoming one of the last battleships to be completed and one of the last battleships in history to be decommissioned.